6:34, I'm going to call the meeting to order. There's a sign-up sheet going around. If you could just sign up so that our minutes reflect who the visitors were. That's a statutory requirement. There's a drinking fountain and bathrooms. You go out this door down to the right. Hopefully it won't go so long that you have to take sustenance and I have to bring in food on this beautiful June night. I had a request from someone in the audience from Putney School. Steve, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your last.
Head, H-E-D. Yep.
Steve Head. There had been a little question about Putney's school program and what it actually cost, and he wanted to clarify that. So, and that was the only agenda item that he was coming to speak on. So if it was okay with everybody, I was going to let him speak for a couple minutes and just give us sort of the numbers on Putney's food program. I don't think our intent is to do that with many line items on this budget and go deep down in, because it's a lot of pages of budget. But in this case, he's made the trip down here, and if it pleases the court, if we could just give him a few minutes to talk about the Putney food program, which is an excellent food program. I've eaten the food there; it's lovely. But he's here instead of feeding us to feed our heads with some numbers instead. So I cede the floor to Steve to just, if that works for you.
Sure. Yeah,
Great.
that's great. Yeah, I had seen some numbers from somewhere comparing the expenses of all of the programs within Wyndham Southeast, and Putney stands out. It was 80-some thousand compared to quite a bit less for some of the other schools. But I guess one thing was I wasn't sure where those numbers came from, and from what I could tell, it was just expenses perhaps, but it didn't include revenues. And as you may or may not know, Putney Central is, we run our program independently, and some of the basic reasons, I guess, were not being happy with previous food service. Well, I'll lay them out. One of them was not being happy with previous food service. The other one actually came from some of the students who were concerned, number one, about how particularly meat was purchased, whether it was humane, because they had done projects on that. And so they were advocating for more sustainably sourced food and more humane raised animals. So that was something we looked at. So we really took a piece of this from the kids. And so another thing that came up was actually treating the food service personnel with respect. I mean, they are feeding our children. And you could say it is the most important thing you can do, because as the saying goes, you are what you eat is not just a saying, it's true, it's fact. And the better quality ingredients you put in a child, the better performance you're going to get from them. So all of those things taken into account, our food budget is higher. But what we've noticed is that participation within the program has increased, and we're doing many more breakfasts. Almost 50% of the kids eat breakfast every morning there. Close to 75% of the kids eat lunch there every day. We have a huge after-school meal program. So you have the expenses, but the revenues offset all that stuff. And I know there is a huge subsidy, and I'm not quite sure, Frank might be able to explain that to some time. I don't understand how the subsidies work for each school, or just our school gets it. But the bottom line is, I ran some numbers today based on claims that we've received or will receive from the state. We also prepare all of St. Michael's schools' meals, all their lunches. And looking at all those revenues compared to the budgeted expense, which was about $124,000, we're almost even. And that includes the subsidy. So I just want to say is that even though our program looks expensive, we are paying people what they deserve. We are feeding children the best that we can, which in a sense I would say is priceless. And we're not really that expensive compared to the other schools. So I just want that to be taken into account as we look at these things, so that you see that the numbers can be deceiving if you don't look into them deeply. So that's basically my 3-minute spiel.
Thank you for that. And I think all of us that have worked on the budget understand when you put the revenues on one page and 400 pages later you get to the expenses, it can be very disjointed process that the CPAs put the regular humans through. So
Right,
I appreciate your clarification, and I think that's something we should be taking a look at and understanding the real costs of things. So I appreciate you putting a little spotlight on this and addressing that. So. Moving on to our regularly scheduled programming, I just wanted to explain, because I think there's a lot of confusion about what this budget is and what, assuming nothing changes, who we are going to be in terms of a governance entity. And so I just wanted to take a step back for everybody in the room. At this moment, we are 5 districts, we're actually 6 districts. Putney District, Dummerston, Brattleboro, Guilford, Vernon, and the BUHS district, like kind of Vatican City there. That's also its own governance unit. And then on top of that, there's a governance unit right now called the WSESU, Wyndham Southeast Supervisory Union. And that is in purple, all of these districts. So the blue of these 5 districts here, plus the pink of Vernon, make the purple WSESU. Starting July 1, if the merger happens, Putney, Dummerston, Brattleboro, Guilford, and BUS will go from being 5 separate districts with 5 different budgets to 1 district, and that's Wyndham Southeast Supervisory District. Vernon will be its own district. They'll have their own budget and their own governance. As of July 1st, we will still have the Wyndham Southeast Supervisory Union, which is the purple unit here, that has its own budget, that provides for central office services, for our superintendent's office, for Paul Smith, our curriculum coordinator, coordinates curriculum throughout the whole supervisory union. Transportation is also managed through there, HR, payroll, all those things are paid for within this whole big entity, WSESU. It has its own budget, and that budget comes into, right now, all of our separate budgets, but in the future, these 2 budgets on the basis of how many students we have. And that has a governance unit that's made from members of school boards of the districts that make it up. So these districts that we know as school districts will cease to exist on July 1st and become Wyndham Southeast Supervisory District, and it will be 1 budget. Vernon will have their budget, and there will still be a governance unit that is covering those supervisory union functions that will continue on until the state changes its mind. So does that kind of clarify it? Do people remember their color theory? Pink and blue make purple? Excellent. So this budget that we are talking about today is the budget for the Wyndham Southeast Supervisory District that starts functioning on July 1. Oh, and special ed as well, I'm sorry, is covered through, in the last 4 or 5 years, all special ed services are provided through the SU. So if we don't pass a budget, there is no money to pay for the educators that are working over the summer. So it was very important that we put together a budget for the WSESD and get it approved by July 1. And the legislature has not given us any way to borrow money if we don't pass a budget. So that's made it much more stressful on everyone involved. So we are doing 2 budget information sessions tonight and then next week on the 18th in the Cusick room, somebody? Is that right? Yes. Cusick room, and the budget vote will be on the 25th in the BUHS gymnasium. So, does everybody have a copy of the report? So what we had planned to do is I was going to walk through our top line of the budget, which if you turn to page 14, you say in Dummerston, if you turn to page 14 in your hymnal, there's this form that says preliminary with a whole lot of boxes on it. And if you look on the top two columns, it says FY19, this is this current fiscal year, it says $48 million. Well, there is no Wyndham Southeast Supervisory District, but this is what our budgets would be if they had all been smushed together last year. The next column over, the $50,172,289 is the budget for the upcoming FY 2020 for the WSESD. Those are our expenditures, and as we were talking before with Steve here, you can see the revenues coming off, things like grants, donations. Below that, the WSESD receives $9,648,986 in offsetting revenues that don't count towards calculating our tax rate. So our education spending is that $50,172,289 less than $9,648,986, which is our education spending of $40,523. So, whoa, so many more numbers than I'm used to in the Dummerston budget. I apologize. We never go that far over. $40,523,303. So, in the state of Vermont, education funding is based on how much you spend and how many students you have as the most important factors. So the next number down from the 40 million is 2234, and that is how many equalized pupils we have in the WSESD pre-K through 12. There's a very convoluted figure for getting that number that doesn't actually mean the number of children that are attending school, because they weight children based on how much they expect it is to educate them. So if a child is learning English as a second language, there's a little bit of extra expense, so they count more than a student. If you're a pre-K student, they expect it costs less, so that only counts as 0.46 a student. So it's loosely tied to how many students we have. So in order to get our education spending per pupil, you take that $40 million, which is our net education spending, and divide it by the number of pupils, and it comes out to $18,139 per pupil. The next line down is the line that breathes fear into every school board member's heart, which is called the excess spending threshold. If you go over that number, 18,311, you pay a double penalty for every dollar you spend. We are not over that threshold. So we just continue on. We get to pass go and continue. So in order to calculate the tax rate, the state has some guy that comes up with something called the yield. And that is way up in the corner, $10,648. And the beauty of doing this in June is we actually have a real number from the legislature. They set this every year based on how much money they think they have in the ed fund, how much they're willing to let the tax rate go up, and sometime about the last day the legislature lets out, they give us this number, which is usually 2 months after we've passed our budget. But in June, we have a real number to divide by. So you just divide that 18,139 by 10,648, the yield that came from the legislature, and you get our basic local tax rate. That our number 18,139 divided by that as a percentage is 170% of the yield. So if you just move that decimal place over 2 points, you'll see our local tax rate for all the merged district is $1.704, or a little over $1.70. But wait, there's more. There's one other factor. Because we fund education statewide on the basis of the value of your home, there's one more important adjustment before you get to the tax rate that your individual town pays. Right now, houses in Burlington are selling for like 30% more than their assessed value. And right now in Dummerston, houses are selling at 97% of their assessed value. So if you're paying your taxes statewide and your assessment's wrong, you're going to overpay or underpay taxes. So every year the town sends what properties sold and how they compare to the grand list. and come up with something called the common level of appraisal. And I think that's another person up at the State House that figures that. I don't think the yield and the CLA person are the same. But they collect that number every year and they send it to the towns. And that number is used to adjust the tax rate in each town to compensate for the differences in the real estate market. Most of our towns are pretty close to their assessed value, but if you turn to flip over to page 15, you can see this little, on the top half of the page, the calculation by town is listed. So the CLA rate, if you see the CLA adjustment factors, that's the common level of appraisal. In Brattleboro town, it's 104% in 2019. This year it's 103.7%. So that has brought the tax rate from 1.704 down to $1.64. In Dummerston, our CLA is very similar to Brattleboro's, almost exactly the same. So that has brought our tax rate down as well. Guilford's very CLA level is very close to the assessed value. That means houses are selling, on average, very close to their assessed value. So in Guilford, the tax rate is going to be very much closer to the $1.70, and it is $1.69 roughly. And in Putney, their houses are selling a little bit more than the assessed value, so their tax rate is slightly more than the equalized school tax rate of $1.70. So that is the top view of how the education fund formula works, and then how it affects each district and why our tax rates are different. Does everybody, ooh, I see nodding. Oh, boy, you're in a middle school science classroom, and I was a middle school science teacher, and you guys are excellent. You guys were excellent students. The next big thing we wanted to do was to briefly go through, because for this first budget, there was no ability to take everything apart and create a really true unified budget. And most of these all of these budgets have been passed by various school boards. And let's see, Dummerston, Putney, and Brattleboro Town have all taken their budgets to their electorate and had it approved. So everybody has gone to their district and been comfortable presenting this tax rate to their district, and the electorate of their district has approved these budgets. Brattleboro is doing theirs tomorrow, is it correct? BUHS is doing theirs tomorrow. And so, with the exception of Guilford, all of these budgets will have been brought to the electorate and approved by the electorate, and they've had the scrutiny of the 28 board members that are currently sitting there and pestering Frank for, can we take $2,000 here and put it there? Frank, we'll miss that, but we'll try and fill in the void. But it has gone through the budget process exactly, with the exception of Guilford that hasn't taken it to their electorate, exactly as it has been done in the past. And that is a certain level of help in this first transitional year. So the board has taken the reason the budget is so large is because we've looked at each original operating entity and put their budget together. And this top sheet that I just went through is really the governing the tax rate. So we were going to spend a couple minutes and have a representative from each existing district spend a few minutes talking about any large changes, any concerns, any last minute changes that may be coming in here, so people have a sense of what is covered in the various district budgets. And the big kahuna in that, which makes sense because it has about half the children, so it is about half the money, is the BUHS budget. And I think, Sean, are you giving
Sure, I'll give it a go, and then if Frank needs to make corrections, he can do that.
We have phone a friend. It's like that old TV show. You can phone a friend.
Yeah. The Brattleboro Union High School budget is Brattleboro Area Middle School, the Wyndham Career Center, and Brattleboro Union High School. So it is the largest of that 50 million. And so we're actually going to bring that to the public tomorrow. And it'll be, as Christina said, the first time the public has an opportunity to vote on it. If we do merge, which on July 1, which seems pretty likely, that will mean the vote tomorrow night won't have the merit, and it'll be voted again on the 25th. So it's a little bit confusing, but it's pretty important to make sure that everything's lined up, as Christina said, for next year. So the Brattleboro Union High School budget is to be voted on tomorrow night, and on the 25th also, is 50,172. Oh, no, I'm sorry, that's wrong. Wrong budget. Sorry.
Not sneaking
Sorry,
that
sorry.
past me, Sean, yeah.
Yeah, I have to skip a line because I didn't know that. I thought maybe I was going to do that intro also. So the BUHS budget is $25,221,000, which represents an increase of $630,000, and it's a 2.6 increase over the previous year for those three entities that I mentioned initially. The high school budget, that is just Brattleboro Union High School, is up approximately 5%. I've seen a couple of numbers, 5.4 or 5, but I think it is 5%, which is an increase of $428,010. So how we originally developed this budget, I happen to be on the finance committee for the Brattleboro Union High School, District 6, and we went and worked with Frank, and we requested a level service, level funded budget from all the administrators. So the administrators came back with their budgets prepared, and we looked at them and then made some tweaks and made some more tweaks, and then we came up with that amount for the high school, which is $8,363.15. The reason for the changes, the biggest one is probably the personnel change. There's going to be a Dean of Students position at the high school next year, which will help with discipline referrals. And then one of the increases is the contractual salary increases that have happened on campus-wide on those three schools, and their contractual increases. Another increase is 10% for the health insurance, so that's across all three campuses. And there's been an addition of a clinician at the high school, and I believe also at BAMS there's going to be additional help for students that need extra help. And some of those costs will be offset by reimbursements from revenue received from Medicaid. So the BAMS budget is up approximately 5.6, and there will be additional academic support at BAMS next year, and that also is partially offset by a grant revenue. So, and the WRCC is a 1% increase. They're the most level, and so that's about it. The BAMS, I didn't mention, the BAMS total is $3,392,343, and the WRCC is $2,380,782. So basically, that budget has been pretty well developed and established by the Brattleboro Union High School Board, and it was passed, I believe, back in February by the board itself. We said, yes, this is the budget that we'd like to present to the public. So that's about it. unless Frank has any.
No, I think that's very good, very thorough.
Actually, I'd like to just give Chris Mays a little plug here. There, in yesterday's paper was Wyndham Southeast Budget gets a passing grade, and he worked with the town finance. But this is an excellent, excellent article. It goes through and it gives all of the, all the numbers are derived, what the big budget is, and it's a really nice overview. So, thank you, Chris.
Yesterday's paper.
Yes, yesterday's paper, yeah. So Chris wrote it, and Chris May is right here, so.
Is it today's paper?
Yesterday's.
Oh, yesterday's?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, it is today,
I think
June
my husband was flashing.
June
my face
11th,
in
yeah,
front of me.
June 11th, yeah, today, so.
So are there any, that brings us to page 86. We make a lot of headway on that. Are there any major questions on the BUHS, BAMS, WRCC portion of the budget? Off the top of your head. I'm not going to cut off debate, but with that we can move on to alphabetically. On page 86 is the Brattleboro Town School District budget. I think, David, you're the anointed one.
Okay, I'll do a little math and say that 86. So I think you want to go to page 100, which should be the last page. No, that's the first page.
That's fine.
Okay, so go to page 99, or I'm sorry, 90.
The 98.
98. And this is the bottom line of this year's Brattleboro Town budget. There's not any really particularly noteworthy changes or developments. Pretty much continuing programs and covering the related costs and finding ways to make better use of our staff, particularly in terms of for coaches and academic support. Finding really skilled people to move into those positions. And as everyone else will say, if they haven't already said, a pretty significant, once again, increase in the healthcare costs. So you see at the bottom line, this budget is up $708,000, 4.83% from the previous year. And then if you go back to the first page in this section, just before the
86.
Yep.
86.
to 86, and you'll see the revenues that we anticipated at the bottom of the first section, the general fund expenditures, and then surplus or deficit. There's $330,000, which we took from our reserve fund to cover some of that $708,000, so we wouldn't have to cover it with a tax increase. And that brought us to the bottom line that you saw previously, to the proposed tax rate. Any questions? Great.
All right.
Christina?
Yes.
Actually, David brought up a really good point, which I forgot to mention, and that is the Brattleboro Union High School District 6 used part of the fund balance also. So we used, I believe it was $500,000 to lower the tax burden. So that was the correct amount?
Yeah,
Or
a
was
little,
it
a little bit more, I think it's
540?
575 maybe.
Okay.
Let's see, very close, yeah. Let's see, it's on beginning of the BUHS document, and if we wanted to be specific, always good to do that. It is
545?
yeah, on page 17, 545, yeah.
Yep. So when David mentioned it, I forgot, oh dear, I forgot that number.
So yeah, you've built up a surplus from previous years. You, at times, if you're finding you want to try to keep your tax rate level, boards will make a decision to spend some surplus in order to level the tax rate.
Or if something changes from the state like last year with the high school budget where you lost a whole bunch of students,
Right.
it's pretty helpful to have that to mind to even that out.
It really is.
Chris?
What was the surplus you used for Brattleboro Town?
What's that?
What was the surplus you used for Brattleboro Town? I didn't
What
get
was it,
that.
or how much was it?
Yeah, how much did you use?
330,000.
Thanks.
Okay, I will take the Dummerston portion. In our initial look, because we hadn't gotten our information, so the published budget, we were over the threshold, which made us all really crabby on the board. And then the grant information started, our small school grant, our transportation grant came through. So what our town approved and what our school board ultimately approved was slightly different from this, and we are right at the threshold. The investment that we made that was different was we started a preschool this year. For next year, we are starting a preschool that all 4-year-olds can attend for free, full day, pre-K at Dummerston School for next year. So because of how the funding formula works, that's a killer your first year you do it, because you don't get to include any of the students in that equalized pupil number that we went through before. That number looks back 2 years. So if you have 12 new students, you don't get to count them. You get to count half of them the next year after you've started to pay for them, and then you get to count all of them the year after. So when you're hired, unfortunately, those preschool children are not going to be well served if we don't pay a teacher to take care of them during the day. So those expenses you have to start paying in the first year, but you don't get to count your equalized pupils until 2 years later. It's really, really helpful when you're starting a preschool. However, preschool is some of the best money. Research indicates that some of the best money you can spend in education, and as we are all grappling with changing demographics and children that need more assistance, preschool, in actual fact, if you didn't have all these state funding formula problems, would be the best money you can spend in education. And I know Liz Adams agrees with me, being a former preschool teacher. So we had an incremental $113,000 in our budget in Dummerston. So we also opted to use our surplus. And when those made some changes, we brought our guidance, we'd increased our guidance from a 60% FTE to a full-time position. We decided to back off to a 4-day-a-week position for that, and made a lot of little adjustments to compensate for this really big expenditure for us. I know $113,000 isn't much when you're talking about the BUHS budget for a small town. It was a big decision, but we'd been working on it for a couple of years and trying to get that surplus. So when those grants came through, that was the real savior that brought us under the 18,311, but we thought it was a good investment to make for children, and both Guilford and Putney have had really great success in being able to identify students with that need extra support at an earlier age, and it's much less expensive in the long run, and it brings down our whole special education budget as well if you can do early intervention. And then in addition, which all of us have this issue, healthcare goes up. No matter, that's, as every American knows, healthcare goes up every year, something around 10%. And then there's the contractual obligations to our educators, which averages about 3%. So those costs also have to be included in our budget. That's the part that we don't have a choice of on the board. So ultimately, our approved spending per pupil was $18,311, and our final tax rate in Dummerston that was approved was around $1.66, although we didn't at the time have perfect numbers for the yield, so it's probably slightly off from that. Oh. Are you doing Guilford as well? We didn't have a Guilford number show up.
Yeah,
Well, he's a
I
BUHS.
didn't cut for Guilford, actually. But I have a question for you, Christine.
Sure.
What page were you on when you just referred to it?
I'm sorry, I was on page 101,
Okay,
100 and 101.
yeah, okay. Yeah.
I apologize.
I did go to quite a few of the Guilford meetings right around the budget development, but I don't think I could really speak to it very well. I know it's kind of interesting, outlying towns. If you look at it, just each town, they're not that far apart. They're in terms of the spending. Guilford is a little lower, we have a smaller student population, maybe less than 100 at this point. But that might not be full-time equivalent students either, so. So I think I'd like to hand it over to Frank for the Guilford, if you could do that.
I could give a very brief overview.
That
Sure.
would be excellent, Frank.
To do that. So page 106. So maybe in similar fashion to what you've heard, just a high-level summary. Page 106 for Guilford. You see in the far right-hand column, FY20 budget. The first several lines of data are the funding sources. So as you look down that column, you see a total revenue $3,037,000, and then you see a proposed budget of $3,112,000. So similar to the other districts, there's use of fund balance to reduce tax liability of $75,000. The budget is up 6.5%, $190,000 as proposed, and they've had a few major increases. Probably the biggest one is something you've heard earlier tonight. So if you just keep turning the pages, it's the next page, which after the there's a page 107. And then the 108, when you get into the detail, it's easy to lose track of it, but the page numbers are over here on the, it's a landscape document, but it's over here on the side. So you gotta look to your left hand where your thumb is. Page 108. So right off the bat here, you can see when you just look at spending in that difference column, so it's the second from the far right. You see a $55,000 figure. Similar to Dummerston, there was an increase in the pre-K program costs that has been a major investment for Guilford over the last few years, and their program is working very well. They've been fully subscribed, and it's been very well regarded. It just got started 3 years ago. So when we look at major pieces of the increase, that's probably one of the largest increases. And then there was additional staffing. You see under the teacher line item a little bit more than the standard increases there. The other somewhat significant investment in Guilford, I believe, was in the secondary budget, where in the event that there was not a merger, they wanted to have the costs covered. So we have regular programs on page 10, a total you see of regular programs, meaning direct instruction. I'm sorry, this is the budget page 10, but the whole booklet is page 117. You can see a figure of 171,000. So in total, for all of their instructional programs, that's where you see the majority of the spending is in the instructional program area. So we've highlighted some of the increases. Early ed, some in the direct instruction. And I think those are probably the highlights. I'll just skim through, when looking at the rest of the dollar difference columns, there's no other, really large single numbers. So those are some of the highlights.
Yeah, I would just add that I know Guilford thought that the small school grant was going to be in jeopardy, and I happened to go to that meeting, and when I think it was Frank announced that that was going to be available, that really was a big relief, because once again, you didn't want to be over the cap that Christina had referred to earlier, and that it just gave some breathing room. So it was one of the things that was going to be probably tweaked in the Act 46, but it wasn't for either Dummerston or Guilford, so that was a really good thing.
Yeah, and maybe just to reiterate, that's a very good point. On page 107, we had this early theme. Steve started us out with, you're going to look at expenses, make sure you look at revenues too. So on page 107, as Christina also pointed out, we take a board proposed budget and then we reduce it by revenues. And the revenues would be the non-tax revenues. And it's the line 10. That's the important number when you're dealing with taxes. What's happening on line 10 on this document? And because revenues are up 8%, that substantially offsets the increase in spending. And that's where, when you go down to the bottom line, their proposed tax rate is actually lower in fiscal year 20, despite the 6% increase in spending. And it's because the type of revenue that is coming in, and as Sean indicated, a significant amount of that is the small schools grant. And there's also recognition of after-school program revenue that was, additional money.
Thank you, Frank.
Okay.
And Putney, which of you is the victim here?
Putney is fairly short. Putney presented this year a budget of $3,403,070, which represents an increase of 4.4% in the budget, which leaves us with a per pupil spending rate of $17,500. Sorry, my eyes jump around when I'm trying to read and talk to you. $17,752. It would have resulted, had we not merged, in a tax rise of 1.1%. So this is pretty much a level funded budget, despite the fact that we added a para and we had a slight increase, an increase in our special education budget. We are in a slightly different place than the rest of the schools because since we passed this budget, our rising second grade class exploded in enrollment, and we will have to add a second grade teacher because there are too many students for one class. In addition, we spent down some of our capital fund in order to fund the school forest that we divided from the rest of the property, to establish a nonprofit to maintain it, and for some immediate maintenance needs. That those costs will be passed in the future. They will come through a nonprofit that's being established and will not come out of school funds anymore. And if there is literally anything else that I should be explaining, I will also defer to Frank.
This is good. Good overview.
So I wanted to open it up to any general questions. We'll do our best. Yeah, those are, sorry, you're in the middle school science class and you hatched chicks, so that's what you're hearing. I should have warned you beforehand if you thought you were hearing like birds in the ceiling or something.
We're also smelling them.
Yeah, they do have, yeah, they're on their 8th grade field trip right now, so I'm not sure how much the 7th graders are cleaning the pen, in the absence of the 8th graders and the instructor.
I did have one question. Did Putney use fund balance to reduce the,
Putney did not, yeah.
Putney did not.
We
No.
certainly have in the past, though.
They
Yeah.
have, yeah. The 18 budget they did, and the 19 budget, and the 20 budget they did, and that's on page 120. Sort of the difference between the revenue and expense. If it's zero, then that's the,
Oh, I see,
yeah,
yep.
that's
Got
the
it.
indicator.
Yep.
But they do have a fund balance. There, you see there, 112,000 as of the last audit, June of 2018.
Well, seeing that there are no questions, you'll have another opportunity. I'm sure you're going to go home and, oh, I knew.
I have a
All
statement,
this way for
not a
nothing.
question.
Sorry?
I have a statement, not a question. Is that okay?
Yes, well, I'm sure. Any questions? Statements or questions are welcome.
Hi. People who don't know me, my name is Franz Reichsman. I live in Brattleboro. I'm the chair of the Representative Town Meeting Finance Committee, and I thought I would just explain a little bit about that. All the rest of you towns have town meeting. We have a representative town meeting. We elect people to be town meeting representatives. And town meeting itself is required in the town charter to have a finance committee to review budgets and anything else that affects the taxpayers. So, up until the merger of the school districts, we would review every year the Brattleboro Town School District budget. And we're also required to review the Brattleboro Union High School budget, even though the town meeting representatives don't vote on that budget, but it still says in the charter that we shall do that. So by extension, we've also been looking at and reviewing the Wyndham Southeast School District budget, the unified district where the budgets have all been merged. So we've been looking at those as they've been coming into existence and the separate budgets. We did our usual reports this year on the high school budget and the Brattleboro Schools budget, knowing that those might never actually exist as separate budgets, but we did file our reports over the winter, and anyone who's interested in those can go to the Brattleboro Town website, and I think they're also on the Supervisory Union website, and look for the Finance Committee's budget reviews on the high school and the Brattleboro Town School budgets, which do make up about 80% of the Unified School District budget. So there is information there that people can look at, and what we said about, the Finance Committee said about those budgets when they were initially proposed. The real reason I'm standing up here, though, is to clarify something that's in the budget report that we did on the Unified School District budget, which we just approved on Friday at our meeting of the Finance Committee. And just as the school boards and the central office have been under a lot of time pressure due to the compressed time frame that we're looking at, our committee was under some time pressure as well. We put in our report that there was something we didn't understand about the tax rates comparing what they would have been for Brattleboro under the merged budget and a hypothetical unmerged budget. And since we didn't understand it, we said we're going to look into it further. And so we have looked into it further, relying, of course, on the fount of information represented by Mr. Rucker, who straightened me out on a couple of things that I wasn't really, that I didn't understand and that our committee didn't fully understand. And I'm even going to introduce another committee member here. David Levenbach happens to be here and is also on the Finance Committee with me. So anyway, what did we learn and what do we have to say about this budget difference that we didn't understand? So what we try to do every year is compare this year's budget and last year's budget. What's new spending? What's the tax rate going to be? And of course, in some ways, that's the bottom line, is how much are people's taxes going to be? So this year, we tried to compare what the tax rate with the merged district would be compared to what the taxes might have been in Brattleboro without the merger. And we kind of made a misstep there because, well, what we didn't realize was that we were making an assumption about a couple of things that could be true, but might not be true, and they were sort of hypothetical assumptions that should have been made more explicit in our report. Specifically, there were two things that we more or less overlooked. One is a mathematical thing, and the other is more procedural. The mathematical information is that deriving the tax rate depends very importantly on the number of equalized pupils, which is something that Christina went over before. And because we didn't have an accurate number of equalized pupil for the separate towns, we couldn't really calculate a tax rate that would have been in place without the merger. So we had sort of made an assumption about the number of equalized pupils in what we said, which may be close, but may not be. And so to say this is what it would have been was an overstatement on our part. The other matter is procedural in that if there were no merger, the school boards may have made different decisions on their spending and priorities, which typically does happen as the process goes along. So we don't really know exactly what the expenditures might have been. So those are the two things that lead me to want to tell people and explain to people that when you look at that specific comparison of what the tax rates would have been with and without the merger, you really need to take that with a pretty large grain of salt. It's one possible calculation, but it is by no means definitive. And I just wouldn't want people to react strongly to that in some way that would determine, oh, well, we have to do this now because this report says that these differences exist. So I just want to say, look at that, but look much more at the overall budget, the taxes you're going to have to pay under the merger, and what the students and the communities are getting for that amount of money. I think our conclusions remain valid, which are that we support the budget as put forth, recognizing there may be some last-minute changes on the 25th. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it certainly was talked about during the budget development process. But barring some major change at the meeting on June 25th, we do support this budget. We think it represents a lot of good hard work by the school boards in their districts and by the central office to put it all together. So that, to me, I just want to emphasize that take-home message and hope that people don't get confused by this this little discrepancy in terms of how we put things together. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. I would just echo, I wish the state would have provided us numbers because one of the goals of Act 46 was transparency and accountability. So to have given us those numbers so that citizens and finance committees could actually make that comparison and look at it would have been very transparent and very accountable to the lawmakers, that if you could say this is what it really is. So it's ironic that
No transparency.
no transparency. It would have been very nice. I know Frank tried to get those numbers and he was told we would not get them. So it's concerning to us. I'd also like to say that, as I said before, every board was willing to go to their own electorate with this budget. So people weren't, no Dummerston board, no Putney board, anybody that went in front of their electorate treated it the same way as they've always treated budgets, and we're not trying to stuff a whole bunch of stuff in there that we could pass on to our neighbors. Nobody proceeded with that, and that was one of the real strengths of this being the first budgeting process. So I'm very certain that everybody took the same scrutiny, took the same level of concern for the tax base as if it was their original tax base, because it was. So.
Thanks for clarifying this. This whole thing has been daunting.
Really? I'm surprised to hear that.
Thank you for saying this, because it's been with great trepidation that we put this all together, and we would have truly liked to do it at a more relaxed pace with a little more ability to do this. But I really appreciate everybody coming out on a beautiful evening in June. And I mean, I could run numbers all night long, but I'm weird, so there's that. So I appreciate everybody coming down. Are there any other questions or statements or thoughts? You'll have another opportunity on the 18th in the Cusick room. We're going to do another budget information session, but I'm very grateful to BCTV for coming tonight, so that if you think you missed something, you can feel free, and you've got the handout. So. You can follow along on BCTV. This usually comes out in about 3 days. And at 7 p.m. in the BUH gymnasium is the budget vote. It is like the BUHS vote in that you show up, you vote. It's not a ballot. You show up. The town clerks are there to sign you in. It's a voice vote from the floor. So if you show up, you get, Dick DeGray always says, you know, I love showing up for the BUHS meeting because it's rare that I have so much power over so much money, because maybe 10 people, 20 people show up and it's $25 million. So $50 million, if you show up, the budget passes or does not pass. So this is one of the times where it's a great responsibility to the people who show up.
This is on the 18th.
On the
25th.
25th, June 25th, 7 o'clock in the BUH Gymnasium. There will be I'm 99% sure there will be childcare available. Everybody wants to do childcare in March and nobody wants to do it in June, so we're still working on that, but I think we have some leads. And if you need a ride to attend, various board members are working on driving people in, so contact somebody in your local district board if you're interested in joining and need a ride to get down to Brattleboro. So we're trying to make it accessible, trying to inform people, and if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'm on the WSESU. If you go on to the WSESU website, and WSESD has a little line under boards, and you can contact board members if you have a specific question.
Just quick, on the 18th then, there's,
Another budget info session.
so similar to this, just.
Exactly.
Okay,
We
okay.
just-
Just clarifying more aspects of budgets.
Because it's $50 million and because it's four spread out towns, we thought we should give people 2 opportunities in 2 parts, you know, one north, one south in the district to allow people multiple opportunities. It's a busy time of year too, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, just one thing I noticed, in the interest of transparency, I noticed that on the 3-year spending, 3-year comparisons for each of the districts, Brattleboro and Dummerston have the actual enrollment numbers included, but the high school and Guilford and Putney don't, and it's actually a 4-year inclusion, so it gives you a good sense of actually, we have some pretty stable numbers here. We're not seeing what a lot of other regions are seeing, but I wonder if we could get those, they're in most of everybody's town reports.
They're
I'm
in,
sure.
on
What
page,
page you on, David?
So I was just looking at any of the 3-year comparisons at the front of any of the budgets.
It's also on page 19,
Thank you.
for all the districts by grade level.
there's a chart here on page 19 that shows our enrollment by grade, by school.
Yeah.
So you can,
That was what page, remember?
Page
in
19.
that is done October 10th, I believe that's the October 10th census probably?
That's right, yes, for 3 years. Mhm. Or it's for the 2017 and the 2018 years, and it's by grade levels, for a little more detail. And just so folks can understand the totals. So if you look at that top segment of data, you see the list of towns, and it goes Brattleboro, Dummerston, Guilford, Putney, Vernon. So you can see where the enrollment is on those first lists. They're all in the K through 6, unless of course the school has a 7 and 8. So you see those enrollments, and then the names repeat again: Brattleboro, Dummerston, Guilford, Putney. So those are the member towns of BUHS, and that's why you see enrollment, nothing in there for K through grade 8, and then you see statistics for grade 9, 10, 11. The very far right-hand total are the subtotals of the elementary programs, or the attendance, again, K through 8 if they exist, or K through 6 in the example of Brattleboro Town. And then the 811 figure is just the total of the Brattleboro Union High School. And the same data for the prior year is below, and as David was just saying, relatively stable. BUHS going from 819 down to 811, and actually with the pre-K, the elementary is going from 1,718 to 1,750. The bottom set of data is just the differences by grade level for each town. And many of you may know that, well, Brattleboro's got over 1,000 kids. Why are we looking at numbers like 800? And these are resident kids. So these are the kids that get turned into those equalized student numbers that Christina and David have been referring to. In addition to these 811, The reason why Brattleboro Union High School has a $3 million tuition revenue, so of the $9 million that Christina led us off with, $3 million of that is tuition received at Brattleboro Union. The context again is 50 million in spending minus 9 million in revenue equals 40 million in what we call ed spending. Well, a lot of that is tuition from Dover, Marlboro, and now Vernon that attend the Brattleboro Union High School. So, and that's probably another, it's over 200 kids, including when we include all kids, which is kids that apply for school choice, where they come to BUHS and don't pay. That's part of a public school choice law that's been around for many years. So there's a little background.
I notice this is for 17 and 18. Can we get those numbers for 19 and 20 too?
20 hasn't.
Well,
20 hasn't
these are the most recent, so the first column of data is the November census, which would have been 2018, so just a few months ago. So that's the most recent school census that's available, publicly available. And we certainly have like attendance data every day that we, I think everybody looks at. It's not substantially different.
Did you have a question?
Well, no, I just have a little plug. There is a meeting tomorrow night at the Brattleboro Union High School gym. So if people are keen on going to a meeting, that'll be, once again, same budget presentation that I made, that Frank augmented with the Brattleboro Union High School District 6 budget. And then there's another warning about athletic and field improvements. So that'll be a voice vote. And it's pretty important because I think it's a good opportunity for Brattleboro to improve their fields if possible, because we're so limited space-wise in Brattleboro. So anyway, that's tomorrow at 7 in the gym in the high school.
Thank you, Sean. I should have mentioned that. I will be there. I see no hands. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Anne. We have a second.
Second.
Thank you, Tim. All those in favor?
Aye.
Nays or abstentions? The ayes have it. The motion carries, and we are adjourned at 7:37.